We are the masters of our destiny. We will build Canada strong. The days of our military sending 70 cents of every dollars to the United States are over. We are on track to double our non-U.S. exports over the next decade. That is $300 billion. A Canada for all, a Canada strong that no one can ever take away.
For decades, Canada sent 70 cents of every military dollar across the border to the United States. Quietly, consistently, without serious public debate. Then one night, Mark Carney stood before the country and ended that arrangement with a single sentence. So what exactly changed? And why does it matter far beyond Canada's borders? In a nationally watched address following his election victory, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney delivered what many analysts are now calling the most significant defense policy statement in Canadian history. He announced that Canada would no longer direct the majority of its military spending toward American contractors and American supply chains.
Our new defense industrial strategy will catalyze $500 billion of investment to build Canadian industry from aerospace to AI, creating over 125,000 new jobs in the process.
The era of funding the United States defense industries with Canadian taxpayer money is finished. This was not a minor policy adjustment. This was a structural break. Carney framed it deliberately and without apology. Canada, he made clear, would now build its defense capacity using its own resources, its own workers, and its own industrial base.
We are building big things again by removing all federal barriers to internal trade and fast-tracking projects that will connect, diversify, and propel our great country.
The announcement landed at a moment when relations between Ottawa and Washington are under serious strain. American tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum, combined with repeated political pressure from the Trump administration, created the conditions that made this declaration not just possible, but necessary.
We are going to build Canada strong with Canada Steel, Canadian aluminum, Canadian lumber, Canadian workers.
The numbers behind Carney's statement are striking. For years, Canada allocated a significant portion of its defense procurement budget to American defense contractors. Companies like Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and Boeing received Canadian government contracts worth billions annually. Meanwhile, Canadian manufacturers in Hamilton, Montreal, and Vancouver watched those contracts cross the border. Carney's new direction points specifically toward Canadian steel, Canadian aluminum, and Canadian lumber as the foundation of a rebuilt domestic defense industry. These are not abstract materials. These are industries that already exist inside Canada, already employ Canadian workers, and are already capable of scaling up with the right government commitment. On the civilian side, the economic shift is already measurable. Canadian tourism recorded its strongest domestic numbers in years. Train travel increased by 50,000 additional journeys. National park visits rose by 13%. National museum attendance climbed by 15%.
Canada's tourism sector had a record-breaking summer, 50,000 more train rides, 13% more visits to our national parks, 15% more visits to our national museums.
Canadians were already redirecting their spending before the government made its formal declaration. To understand why this moment matters, you need to understand how this dependency was built in the first place. After World War II, Canada and the United States constructed a shared continental defense architecture. NORAD brought both nations under a single aerospace warning system. Joint exercises, shared intelligence, and coordinated procurement followed naturally. The logic was geographic. Two nations sharing one continent needed to cooperate. But over the decades, cooperation drifted into dependency. Canadian defense procurement increasingly favored American contractors. The industrial rationale was straightforward. American defense firms had scale, technology, and established supply chains that Canadian firms could not easily match. Canadian governments accepted this arrangement across party lines. It was presented as alliance management, as the cost of being America's closest partner. Then the Trump administration imposed tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum. It questioned NAFTA. It made public statements about Canadian sovereignty. What had been framed as a partnership began to feel like leverage. The consequences of Carney's announcement ripple across multiple sectors simultaneously. For the Canadian industry, the shift represents a significant opportunity. Steel producers in Ontario, aluminum smelters in Quebec, and lumber operations across British Columbia now have a direct pathway into defense contracts that were previously inaccessible. This is not a small market. Defense procurement runs into billions of dollars annually. Redirecting even a portion of that spending domestically creates jobs, strengthens supply chains, and builds long-term industrial capacity. For the United States, the impact falls on specific industries and specific states. American defense contractors that relied on Canadian procurement contracts will face reduced revenue. States with significant defense manufacturing employment will feel the economic pressure. Canada is demonstrating that even the closest American partners are capable of drawing firm boundaries when the terms of partnership become one-sided. And for ordinary Canadians, the impact is already visible in daily economic behavior. What Canada does next, how quickly it builds domestic defense capacity, how firmly it holds the new spending commitments, and how skillfully it manages the relationship with Washington will determine whether this moment becomes a genuine strategic turning point or a political statement without lasting structural change. Either way, the 70-cent era is over. The question now is what Canada builds in its place. If this kind of calm, clear political analysis is what you are looking for, subscribe to this channel. We cover the decisions that are quietly reshaping global power, explained clearly, without noise.